think it's time to start. So welcome to the second meeting online of the third sector special interest group, where we will be welcoming, and she's just told us how to pronounce her name, Xian Basker, who is the co-chief executive of Data Orchard, and we'll be talking about how organizations get better with data. The timetable is the same as we had before, so we've got 2 minutes of introduction with me, and then 35 minutes for the talk, and then 15 minutes of questions, which I will chair, and then a close at 3 o'clock. Just a word for our next event, which will be on a Wednesday, Wednesday the 13th of July, again at 2 to 3 o'clock, where Kerry Flanagan, who is the director of Homestart Kirklees, and Padmina Akella, who's a pro bono volunteer, will be talking about the pro bono project that was done in support of Homestart Kirklees. Registration is not yet open for that, and details will be issued closer to the date, probably in the next week or two. So first, we're going to run the same poll as we ran last time to ask about people's experience, whether they are OR analysts, whether they commission work, and what sort of experience you have of working in the third sector. Nobody's answered so far.
Can I check that that's come up? I have launched it, but I can't see it on the screen.
I've got it on screen, but
good.
I've not got any responses.
Oh,
oh, somebody's done something.
No, so what the audience can see, Malcolm, is they can't see the responses as they come in. They can't see the responses time. Right.
Yeah.
So I know we have a slightly larger audience than appears to be responding. So if you just give it another moment or two to get your act together.
Okay, so everybody is doing OR or analytical work. Nobody is doing commissioning or listed both or neither. 2 people have listed as working for a charity. 7% are volunteering for charity, and 1 person is working in humanitarian or health areas. Okay, thank you all for that. So now it's a welcome to our speaker. So Sian has helped. Sian's, I said it wrong again, didn't I? Sian's roots are in digital access and inclusion, spending nearly over 25 years exploring new frontiers in digital technology and bringing the benefits to the non-profit sector. Sian's previously held senior leadership roles in business development, digital strategy and impact management within local, national and international charities, and also in academic research. Since 2010, she's been considered a data champion. She's co-chief executive of Data Orchard, and since 2015 has led their pioneering national and international research on data maturity in the not-for-profit sector, with a focus on building organizations' data capabilities and helping them achieve greater impact. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. I shall just share my screen. Bear with me. Okay, using full screen here.
Yes.
Excellent. So the topic of my presentation today is about how organizations get better with data. Now, I suppose one of my key points I would like to say about this is Data Orchard itself is a social enterprise. So it means we're part of the not-for-profit sector. We trade for social good and for social impact. Our clients are primarily not-for-profit sector clients, non-commercial. So we work a lot with charities, we work sometimes with other social enterprises, and we also work with public sector clients. And we've been studying, really. I think when we first started out, we felt that we were going to be a sort of consultancy that helped other organisations do research and analysis. And very soon into our establishment as an organisation, we started to feel that we would be more useful in the world if we could help those organisations to get better data in the first place. So quite often they used to give us absolutely terrible data to analyse that was really difficult, and we felt it would be more useful for them to have the skills to develop their own data capabilities within their own organisations. I think one of my key points about data that we have learned is not everybody loves it. It's a little bit like Marmite in that obviously some people love data. I mean, obviously, because I come from a maths background and quite a lot of my colleagues are sort of researchy, data analytics-y kind of people, we absolutely love data, but it's really not the case for everybody. And even in the polls that Marmite do, I imagine a lot of people who don't like Marmite would not complete a poll to say anything about Marmite because they're so emphatically against it. I just wanted to start by giving you a little bit of a potted history of our data maturity work. I mean, I think it's true that data has been around forever, like hundreds of years. There's some fascinating, very ancient works around data and visualization, and some classic stories of the past around disease and poverty, for example, that are really inspiring. But I think there was a real turning point in sort of 2008, 2010, where suddenly there was a huge revolution almost. There was massive media attention and excitement about open data. There was Hans Rosling delivering TED Talks with amazing data visualizations about global health and economic changes. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation was publishing new visualizations and in new styles around poverty in the UK. And for many people, myself included, this was a real epiphany moment. There was lots on open data, big data, data is the new oil, that old trope. But it was certainly a moment of excitement. And it's absolutely true that in the last sort of 10, 15 years, the tools and techniques and the availability of data for analysis and visualization has absolutely transformed. And I think for us, there was a real excitement for the non-profit sector about the positive role of data in changing the world, and imagining if we could share data better, we could find better and faster solutions to many of our entrenched problems. So in 2013, I was one of 8 people who helped to set up Data Orchard as a social enterprise. People who had skills in data and research and stats, and lots of experience working in charities and public sector and communities. And we had this real passion about how data could help to make the world a better place socially, economically, environmentally. And it was also a time when there were a lot of other organisations who were sort of feeling this visionary buzz. I'm not sure, but I have a sense that the OR Society Pro Bono scheme started around that time. Yeah, and I think, the ODI, the Open Data Institute, DataKind UK, some of the national umbrella bodies like NPC were doing exciting work around data and justice sector. So there was a sort of, I suppose, a momentum around this sort of data for good cause. And so we started in 2015, actually in collaboration with DataKind UK, to try and understand what an organisation's journey to getting better with data would look like. And we wanted to try and identify what were the key factors. We really started by looking at other models, and in fact found hundreds of data maturity models. Almost all of them were from the commercial sector, and they were primarily aimed at very technical audiences and sort of analytics teams in huge enterprises. And we found that the language and the context didn't really work or translate for the not-for-profit sector. And so that was when we realized we had to create our own. So in 2016, we started doing our research with DataKind and with hundreds and hundreds of charities nationally, and we ran workshops and focus groups, and we went to really dig under the bonnet in as diverse a range of organizations as we could find. And I know for those of you who might be familiar with the non-profit sector, it's incredibly diverse. You know, it's everything from transport to housing to poverty to community. It's absolutely vast. I can talk more about that. But we were trying to find as varied as possible a range of organizations, local, national, international, different sizes, to see if we could create a sort of generic model of what were the important factors and what were the stages of development. So we produced our first framework, our first theoretical model back in 2017. And it took us another 2 years after that to create our first online assessment tool. And I think the difference between those two is, as I'll come on to shortly, is the ability to find the right questions to ask and for the right people in an organization to ask in order to measure where an organization's at. The following year, we launched a more advanced customizable version for larger organizations. We started measuring our impact, so trying to find out what effect using our data maturity assessment tool had on the organizations that were using it. And last year, we produced our first State of the Sector Data Maturity Report, and we launched another product, which is about taking cohorts of organizations through the data maturity process. So here we are today in 2022. It feels like a very long history now. I have to cut that shorter next time. But we did, in fact, just launch in January this year, version 2.1 of our framework. And I think it's an important thing to say that the theory is not static. You know, things change. What we think is good practice, even in 2017, by 2022, 5 years later, we actually have a much better idea of what good and great looks like and what that journey looks like. And we envisage probably in another 5 and 10 years' time into the future, we will perceive good practice as being very different to how we understand it at the moment. So that's a sort of potted history of our journey around data maturity. I think I would like to, probably for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, it would be useful to share some definitions. So we understand and define the term data maturity as an organization's journey towards improvement and increased capability in data. And when we talk about data, we take a really holistic view about it. We define it really broadly as all the kinds of information an organization collects and stores and analyzes and uses. And it can be in all kinds of formats. So it can be numbers, it can be words, it can be images, videos, maps, the whole works. And of course, when you describe it in that very broad and holistic way, it means it's everywhere, all over people's organizations, in every department, in every service, in every job role. It's in all of those digital files and folders. It's all those spreadsheets everywhere, all over the organization. And of course, you've got lots of databases and all kinds of digital tools now in use. So, there's all of that. And of course, it's still on paper. There's a phenomenal amount of data still on data and still in filing cabinets, as we found in every sector. It's a little secret. But I suppose because it's so pervasive and because it's actually quite complex, it can be overwhelming when you try to think about data at an organizational level, which is why it's really helpful to set out a simple framework to try and give structure to how you think about it. And so this is the data maturity framework that we've devised. It has 5 stages from unaware through to emerging, learning, developing and mastering on that 5-stage journey. And in our case, it has 7 key themes. So 2 of those themes are quite obvious, like having the data itself and having the tools to collect and store and analyze it. A couple of them are very much about purpose. So the ways in which you're using data, both service facing and in terms of running your own organisation, the ways in which you're analysing the data. How are you analysing it? What questions are you asking of it? And as you'll see, a lot of it is about people. So the leadership and the culture and the skills are absolutely crucial factors in this journey. I suppose just to say a thing about maturity frameworks generally, sometimes they are called maturity models. Essentially, it is a structured description of the characteristics and stages of improvement to describe what poor, great, and good look like. And these sorts of frameworks have evolved primarily from the quality management field. And their aim is really to try and simplify all that complexity so that you can enable organizations to be measured and to be compared. And like ours, most of them are used for promoting best practice with the ultimate purpose of learning and improvement. So please don't try and read this. I'm just putting it up as a demonstration. This is a page taken out of our data maturity framework. This is the theoretical model, which is a description. And you can download this for free. It's freely available, licensed for non-commercial use on the Data Orchard website. It's about 15 pages long. It's, as I say, it's a theoretical model about the concept. And what was quite interesting when we first published our framework was people said, well, that's all very good, but it's not really going to engage my CEO in reading this kind of thing. And moreover, what questions should we be asking ourselves when we want to delve into our data maturity and try and understand it? And so that's when we decided to try and break it down and create something that was more useful and more accessible and actually more usable for organizations in trying to understand their data maturity. So we created an assessment tool. So our data maturity assessment is essentially an online questionnaire, and it's designed around each of these 7 themes and sub-themes. So for example, in this one, the leadership theme focuses on questions around attitudes and plans and capability and the investment of leaders. So the assessment itself, we've actually got 3 types. We have the single-use individual version, which is free. It's completely free. It's very widely used. And it's ideal for quite small organizations. Sometimes in small organizations, just a few people get together to take it together as a group, or people take it individually and compare their results. And it gives you a sense of your overall stage, how you scored across the themes, and it will indicate some priority areas for you to focus on, and it gives you some benchmarking. So actually the tool's now been used by over 3,000 people from hundreds of different organizations, and that's freely available on the website. I'll give you a link at the end of my presentation for that. Then we have the organizational version. So this is a little bit more sophisticated in that you can custom brand it and add some additional questions. Everybody who takes it in the organization gets their own report, and then you get one big overall report for the whole organization that combines all the results from the individual assessments that people have completed. And we've got various, we've got a whole resource pack that goes with that to support communicating and engaging with your organization and planning how you might do that. And I'll talk more about that later in the presentation. And we've also got reseller and partner discounts. So sometimes other consultants and support providers use our tool with their clients. So that's another option available in there. And we can do all sorts of other things I can talk through shortly. And then there's the cohort type of assessment, where we have groups of organisations who take the assessment together. So we've just completed a project with Scottish Government where they've had 7 public sector organisations take a data maturity assessment at the same time. So today I'll talk a little bit about the individual and organisational ones today. essentially the principles of the data maturity assessment are that a person completes the 20-minute online questionnaire. And as part of that, they benefit. The biggest benefit we've seen is around learning. So by answering the questions, people get a sense of what data is all about. They get a sense of what they should be thinking about in the context of their organization. They also get a measure, so they get a sense of where they assess the organization to be. And excitingly, we're really pleased that for most, it's an inspirational tool. So it generates ideas, it motivates people to get better, and they can start to see what better might look like by taking the assessment. As I said, the free version is really for individual users, but because data is a team sport, and this is an absolute crucial thing in organizations getting better with data, is a collective approach. A single person can only really ever give their personal perspective on where the organization is at. And to get a truer picture, the organization version is better because you get those really diverse views from across the organization. And it is quite exciting when you do this at scale and you engage multiple people in the process. As I said, you can tailor this a little bit with branding and your own questions. But really, as I said earlier, data maturity is very much founded on people. So without that leadership and culture and skills of the people of your organization, you're not going to get the motivation to help people to help their organization to get better. So I think as I say, it's a start of a journey. Usually people are taking the data maturity assessment because they want to develop some kind of plan or strategy for getting better. So it is the start of a journey. And it also sets a baseline. So you do get a report at the end of the assessment. I'll show you an example in a moment. But also you get, I suppose you can see this as a baseline for where you want to get to next, and an opportunity to look back in the future at how far you've come. This is an example of an organisation report. So you can see where your organisation is. So in this case, they're doing quite well. This is an organisation that's at the developing stage. So that's the 4th out of the 5 stages overall. You can see in this case, they've engaged 133 people in the organisation. So all those 133 people took their own assessments and gave their own perspective on how they saw the organisation. Overall, this organisation scored 3.2 out of 5. And they're strongest in uses, data and culture. And their priority areas to focus on suggested are analysis, tools and skills. And you can see also in there the benchmarks. The benchmarks change all the time, obviously, as more organisations take the assessment. And then you can delve into any of the 7 key themes to get a further description. So this is where delving into analysis, for example, you get a score for this organisation. They've scored 2.9 out of 5, which is bang on average for the sector. Gives a comparison with the benchmark group. And it describes perhaps what this organisation's current stage is at. So it's 2.9. So it's sort of leaving this learning stage and moving into the developing stage. And it just gives a description of the kinds of things that you would, the kinds of characteristics that you would see in a more sophisticated organisation around analysis. So that's a sample of the kind of report that organisations get. As you can see, it's quite simple and straightforward. As I say, it's critically a start of a journey. So really, the exciting bit happens after the assessment, when the organisation starts to then talk and plan what it's going to do to improve. And the rewards can all be different. We've often had requests to make our tool change our tool from what it is, which is a diagnostic tool, into a prescriptive tool. People often say, oh, well, can't you just tell us what we need to do? And then we can go off and do it. And the reason it's different in our experiences, I suppose, because every organization is on a different journey anyway. So any data strategy really needs to align with where the organization is going and what its priorities and aims and objectives are. And therefore, the rewards are likely to be different for every organization. But as I said, you will get there's still work to be done after you've done the assessment to get better. And so I'm going to share our theory of change, which we have tested. So essentially, the kinds of people who usually take a data maturity assessment or lead tend to be either leaders. We get quite a lot of CEOs or people who are quite new into their roles and are interested in finding out how their organization can be better. Sometimes we have data strategists. So I mean, I'm very excited. There's a whole new career trajectory opening up in the nonprofit world of heads of data or data strategy leads. And or quite a lot of the digital people are having data put under their remit as well. So quite often you have quite senior people who have come in and they're looking for a way to engage their colleagues. Or it might be somebody who within the organization who's a data champion who can really see the potential and is perhaps a bit frustrated that their organization isn't improving as fast as they'd hoped. And often they don't know where to start because it's so big and complex. They find it difficult to have conversations with leaders and colleagues around data, and they don't really know how they're doing compared to other organizations. So then they take the data maturity assessment. I've already talked about these immediate benefits. So the shared understanding, the learning, a measure of where you're at now, and that raised aspirations. That's kind of where we draw our sort of dotted line of our sense of immediate accountability for the impact that our tool has on its users. Because the next stages are actually about what you're going to do about it. And that does require organizations either facilitated by us or by another consultant or by somebody within their own organization to develop that strategy and plan, to secure the leadership buy-in and support for it, and seek the resources to actually implement those changes. So it can take some time from the point when an organization takes an assessment to when it's able to implement those changes and start investing in new people and roles and securing the resources they need. But what really excites us is that there are lots of benefits and rewards, and some of the key ones are obviously around increased knowledge and experience. Better planning and decision making is a really top one. Better services and products. So a lot of organizations go on to improve the design or the delivery or the effectiveness of their services and support. Impact is a big area where organizations get better around understanding and articulating and measuring their impact. Aligned to that, often you get the increase in efficiency and the increases of income. And on the back of that, a lot of the most advanced and mature organizations tell us that it's really given them credibility and influence, whether it's within their own sector and service field, or whether it's with campaigning or policy change, that they're starting to have a much broader evidence base. And when that happens at scale and they're able to collaborate with other organizations in their sector and share data, it gets to be really exciting. So that's a whistle-stop tour through the data maturity assessment theory of change. I'm pleased to say you'll see this as version 2, and that is because we have actually tested it out and done some evaluation work with users of our free and our paid for versions of the tool. And in fact, we're doing another one right now. So if you have already taken the data maturity assessment, please do complete our feedback. Little plug there. So some of the ways in which it can be used, exploring the internal landscape, very popularly with larger organizations. Part of the customization involves internal benchmarking. So being able to identify the teams and services that are the leaders and laggers in data maturity. Sometimes it's a geographic or departmental analysis. Sometimes they're exploring the feel, attitudes around data. I'm always fascinated to hear what springs to mind when you ask people how they feel about data. Comparing with peer organizations. So as I said, we do bespoke benchmarking. So it's possible to compare if you want to just focus on the housing sector or education or social care or local government. Those are all types of bespoke benchmarking we've done. And as I said earlier, evidencing the progress made. So setting a baseline for measuring progress in future and doing repeated measures over time, pre-post intervention. This is an example. I'm hoping I might get away with a box plot chart with this audience. Some of my colleagues have banned me from using them in presentations, and I said, but it's the OR Society, so they will understand a box plot. But for those of you who don't, I should say, this is a range of scores. So the data maturity score measures the 5 stages from a 0 to 5. And a box plot, in this case, with this organization chose to look to get their users to identify which team they were in. And then we compared the scores across those different teams. So as you can see in this service 1, they scored, there's a shorter range. This is the range from the end of these tails here. And the middle kind of central bulk of the respondents, if you were to put the middle half basically here and have a quarter in each tail roughly, then that's how this group scored. So you can see in service 1 there's quite a lot of consensus of opinion, and they think the organization's doing fantastically. Meanwhile, down here in the executive leadership, so they've scored the organization more in the sort of emerging stage, and again quite a lot of consensus of opinion because the box is quite short. And they don't think the organisation is doing very well at all. So these kind of analyses are quite interesting conversation starters about why certain parts of the organisation think it's doing so well or so badly. And sometimes it can reveal pockets of excellent practice. Sometimes you've got some fantastically skilled people doing very sophisticated things squirreled away in parts of the organisation where others aren't aware. And I think it's also interesting to explore where the consensus and disparity of opinion is. The other example I wanted to talk about was repeat assessments over time. So in 2018, we started working with the Cancer Support Charity, and we undertook the blue line on this is in this sort of radar chart is the initial baseline assessment that we undertook in 2019. And we worked with them over 12 months. We focused a lot on some of their weaker areas around skills and tools and data. And 12 months later, they retook the assessment, and we were delighted to see that they had improved, in fact, particularly in the skills and tools area. You'll note that they've actually got worse in terms of how they measured with uses. And I think it's an interesting part of the journey to see sometimes lack of awareness is a problem in how you measure how well you're doing. And actually, as a result of that increase in knowledge, they realized that they weren't using data in all the ways that they really thought they could. We also followed up a year after we completed support to see, so when I was talking about the journey and the time it takes to implement change, I think this is an important thing. And I think for any of you who are consultants or advisors to organizations, you'll know there are a whole range of factors that come into play into whether an organization implements the change successfully. So we were really pleased that momentum had been sustained. And again, we measured them a year after that. I'll summarize this in just the beginning and the end of that journey, because otherwise it looks a very busy radar chart. But that's the overall change that's happened during, actually it was 3 years, it's bookended. And this organisation is one of a handful of organisations that will be taking another assessment this year. So that will be another, we'll be seeing whether there's been any progress. It looks like leadership hasn't nudged very far since the beginning, but uses has indeed both scored lower and then got higher again. So yeah, I think it's, as I say, an interesting thing to follow up over time. This is an example of I just wanted to talk, I mentioned earlier about cohorts, and this is a cohort of organisations in London who took part in a programme called DataWise, and another support provider asked us to measure their cohort before they started their programme of support. So that's what these blue scores are, and you'll notice they're quite different. You know, not every organisation is at the same starting point, and their strengths and weaknesses were quite emphatically different in many cases. And then we remeasured the same organisations, same people in the same organisations, actually only 10 months later. I was a little bit worried that it wasn't going to be long enough, but I think we and the support provider were overall really pleased. I think out of 6 or 7 organisations, only one of them had scored a lower score after that period of time. So it's an interesting approach to measuring and understanding the stories and journeys, and we're increasingly trying to capture more stories of the journeys that organisations have been on and how they've got better. Just to give you a snapshot of the kinds of organisations that have used the assessment, as I said, we did design it for the non-profit sector, which is mostly this NGO, non-governmental organisations sector. But actually the tool itself has been used quite widely by commercial organisations. Some universities have used it, and increasingly it's also being used in the public sector. So there are quite a broad range of organisations using it. Some people, I'm sure you're dying to know which sector is the most advanced. And the truth is there isn't very much difference. I mean, this is only on our first batch of organisations that we were able to validate. That they're all, you know, in the middle there, as you would kind of expect. And those of you who are data people will understand this, but there is a huge variation within each sector and within every organisation. And I think those kinds of conversations are among the most interesting. So I'd just like to round off now with some things you could do next. As I say, you can try our free data maturity assessment. You can come to an event. We run events for charities and non-profits. We run events for consultants and support providers. We've also got events coming up for cohort leads who are interested in having an impact on a whole sector or collection of organisations. You can join our mailing list. So we put out a monthly newsletter where we share interesting stories and resources and case studies about organisations' journeys. And it may be that you have some organisations from the OR Society. I know you've got case studies as well that you use, so it might be that we can collaborate on that. We've got all kinds of tools and resources available to support the data maturity work. And if you're interested in conducting an organisational data maturity assessment, just get in touch and we can set up a meeting. So I'm very excited to get to the point where we can hear some questions, I hope, from the audience. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? I mean, one idea would be to use the Zoom raise hand function. Alternatively, you could turn your camera on and put your hand up.
So while there's a silence, I did raise my hand.
Yeah,
So that's the trick, Malcolm. It's got to be the two-way thing. Sian, that was great. Thank you very much. I found that really, really interesting. And so many, I mean, I reckon I've got about half an hour's worth of discussion that I'd like to follow up. So I do hope that other people in the audience also have questions, because I don't want to hear myself talking. But one of my questions is on the evaluation. Is one of the things that we find difficult with OR, pro bono OR in particular, but all my life as doing OR projects, is that when people have had the project done for them, with them, they want to move on. And to get them to feed back and to say, yep, this is what happened, looking back, yeah, this is what happened, this is where we are now. And then for them still to be in post a year later and able to tell you what happened, it's been really problematic. So how do you do it?
Well, I suppose we've got a mix of approaches. I mean, I think there's one approach that we use around our consultancy support. So very often we do data maturity assessments alongside a piece of work that would be around data strategy. But some of our other projects are probably not dissimilar to yours, where we're perhaps just analysing the data that they give us, or we're advising on what data they should be collecting, or advising on impact measurement. Usually we always ask for feedback immediately after our projects, like within weeks of completing the project, to capture immediate benefits. And we quite often do retrospectives at the end of projects with our clients. And in that, we do ask if we can come back to them 6 months, 12 months later. And as much as possible, I would say we engage quite widely in the organisation. So our approach tends to be that we involve groups of senior leaders or groups of staff in workshops and events. And we try to take quite an organisation-wide approach. And but I absolutely get your challenge of people leaving, because there is always quite a big turnover. So I suppose that's something that we do with our consultancy clients. With the data maturity assessment, we do it through a survey. So we almost took our theory of change and designed some questions around that, and we do it through survey. Our first survey, I mean, I will say response rates are an issue. So in our first one, I think we invited maybe 300 people and we got 75 responses. So there's obviously...
That's a lot better than we get. It's a better response rate than we get, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but when the current one, I think we're again, we're probably in the 30 to 50 so far, but it's live at the moment. So yeah, I mean, I think I suppose that's the bit where we all feel it's kind of the holy grail, because if you work really hard on a project that's been incredible, and then you go back to them 6 months later and half the team have left and nobody really did anything with it, it can be really disheartening. But it's quite an interesting thing about the ownership. And I do think maybe it's about the time we're at now, where organizations are starting to invest in data roles. So, I mean, it tends to be in the larger organizations where they'll have a head of data or a head of data strategy. So it's quite fresh, and I don't know whether it's been the case for you, but certainly for us, we've seen a lot of organizations realizing as a result of the pandemic that they really need to get a grip on their data. But for some, it was a real shock that suddenly everyone's working at home and all the data's in a filing cabinet somewhere, and nobody knows where anything is. And I think that there's a sort of a general move towards that, but I do think that the leadership buy-in is really important, and if it can get embedded in organizational strategy, then it has a better chance of embedding longer term as an asset to the organization and resource for them to build on and continue.
Okay, we've got some questions in the chat function. So one is can you tell us more about how you measure impact? And how relevant is this to impact directly? Is impact sort of next level beyond?
Interesting. I think there are different views on it. Our approach when we're measuring our impact, as I say, we do that through customer feedback. We sometimes do it through these repeat assessments where we're following up a year later, 2 years, 3 years later to see if things have been sustained in the organisation. When we work to help other organisations to measure their impact, we usually take the theory of change approach, and we work with them to not just come up with the theoretical model, but to then explore how they're going to measure their impact and what tools and data they need to collect at what points in time in order to be able to measure their impact. And it's different for everyone. You know, sometimes there are some brilliant resources nationally. So things like What Works Wellbeing, for example, and some of the measures that have now become quite embedded nationally make it much easier to understand and profile the characteristics of people and the change that they're trying to affect.
Okay, another question.
Can I just follow up on that before we get to the other question? I don't know what Jane had in mind, but one of the things at the back of the theory of change is better data gives you better strategy because you've got more insight. Is that something that you try to measure, or do you just get, yeah, we think our strategy was better, or do you just not try to measure that? Because that's one of the things that we have tried to get our heads around as well.
Could you say that again, Ruth?
Yeah, when you're actually measuring the impact, so you've got the feedback, but one of the things that you're trying to achieve through your theory of change is, as I recall, is that having better data gives you better insight, which helps you design better strategy. How do you, at what point do you say we can't measure that, whether they've got better strategy or whether we've got better strategy or not?
It's very hard. I mean, our approach usually goes the other way, that the strategy should define what data you're going to focus on and which data is going to be useful for measuring your strategy. And that's why it's kind of always different. But maybe if the organization's strategy is about driving up customer satisfaction or decarbonisation, then understanding what data assets you've got that already measure those things and whether they actually help you to understand your questions and improve is a moot point. But I think that's the approach we usually take, and we basically tell organisations if they haven't got an organisational business plan, then there's no point writing a data strategy, really. You should go off and write your business plan, and then let's look at how data can support you to drive towards your cause, whatever that is.
Okay, so the next question is, what is your top tip in communicating data maturity and the aim of this process to non-data focused teams?
Well, that's a very good question. In fact, when we first did this project, our organisation is called Data Orchard. Our partner was called Data Kind. We had a project called Data Evolution, and our marketing team was saying, could we just do this without mentioning the word data, please? Because people don't really like data. Yes, it is a challenge. I mean, one of the key things that we've worked really hard to do with our data maturity assessment tool is to try and make it as accessible as possible to non-data audiences. So as much as possible, we've tried to avoid technical language and jargon, and we've embedded more like hover over definitions, so it's slightly educational if you don't know. So for example, I think we had one organisation who said they got a data warehouse, and we thought, oh gosh, that's amazing. That's quite sophisticated for an organisation of your size. And it turned out that they were talking about literally boxes of paperwork in the attic above their offices. So I think there is a challenge for data people generally around communicating complexity. And so as far as possible, we you know, I think many of the organizations we work with have incredibly knowledgeable and talented people in their field, whether it's housing or health or mental health or environment. And I think listening to where they're coming from and how they understand data and how they use data is a really good tip. And listening to their questions, one of my favorite workshops is, if we knew ... we could ... And I think trying to encourage the curiosity of the people who would benefit from the data to help them shape their questions, because it really is about asking the right questions. And it's hard for a technical person who doesn't understand their field to know what those questions are. So to try and get a balance between their expertise and their needs, and what you know, analytical support you can provide is a good match.
Okay. Have you thought about expanding it to organization, as it were? So the way organizations organize themselves to using any of the lessons you get from your surveys, any of the insights you get from your surveys?
I think, well, I'm not quite sure what you mean now, Malcolm, or what the person's question.
I mean, I've seen a lot of models that are very similar to yours in terms of sort of a framework thing. I think one of the most famous is capability and maturity model, which was originally a software thing, but I think it was enhanced to be about organizations, actually how organizations organize themselves.
Oh, I get you. Yeah. We have explored, we're sort of part of a network. There's in the non-profit sector, particularly, there are a lot of digital maturity frameworks. We have a lot of conversations about the chicken and eggness of digital and data, and the whole thing falls down on the paper thing, really. But they're certainly entwined. And I think of the organizational, I mean, we were very pleased that we've embedded quite a lot of questions around data into the sort of national surveys that are being done around digital tools in the sector. I'm not sure where the more generic tools are at the moment with data. There used to be one called Picasso that was a sort of organization quality assurance tool, but we haven't really explored that. Maybe we should.
Yeah.
We do try to engage with those umbrella organisations. We're working with the Wales Council for Voluntary Organisations at the moment, and I think we've got our tool is up on the list of resources for NCVO, the National Council for Voluntary Organisations. So yeah, maybe it will do one day, be part of a general health measure for an organisation.
Malcolm Ho's got his hand up.
Oh yeah, sorry, carry on.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sian, for sharing with us your story and experience with the sectors. It's very much of a story of very real story, by the way, thank you. A very much typical, it seems quite typical story of a consultant to me, that you parachute down to an organization which is new to you, in this case the sector, and then help them and give your expert knowledge. And as the story told us, that they only want the answer and get on with the job, the busy people. So this come into my mind a long tension as a consultant in the OR field, that my question is this equation, or the three things really. On one hand, this sustainability that we keep bragging about, we want to be sustainable. How could we achieve sustainability? So one thing. Another thing is about us as a consultants do not really want to create this dependency of our clients, especially the thin blue line working in resource-intensive shoestring situation of NHS and third sector, etc. So this keep on about the knowledge transfer is a paramount to our practices. So put the two key together, how do we facilitate the knowledge transfer and empower the stakeholder within the organization where we consulting so that they can learn and be sustainable rather than depending on us repeating consulting might be very nice for our pocket in private sector, but may back for the sustainability and quite frankly, a long-term ethical aspect as well. So that's my question. And leave that one in the future looking, as well as in the past, we struggle with it in my early career. Is the AI keep the elephant in the room in my day, and now it's still on about it, including our former Prime Minister, Theresa May, to remind us that AI is our future. And so how can AI help in this equation? I think that's my question, really. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ho, for that. That's really useful. I mean, I think in terms of consultancy, one of the questions we asked ourselves is, have we got the right clients, and are the organisations that we're supporting, are they the right clients, and have they got the right commitment and the right capacity to move forward? I think the emphasis that we have on engage, I mean, usually for our paid clients, because they're paying us, they already have a degree of commitment that they are putting in an investment, and resources are very slim on the ground for a lot of non-profit organisations. So it's usually an indication up front, but it's not always a complete teller of how things will turn out at the end. But I do think the leadership engagement and the leadership commitment to improving with data is absolutely crucial. And if you haven't got leadership involvement and leadership support, even at an early stage, then it's unlikely to see anything happen on the back of the assessment thing. And I think in terms of dependency, again, you know, sometimes there will always be a place, in my view, for independent research and external evaluation or analysis. Sometimes it's about them having the capacity. Sometimes it's about them not having the skills, but those tend to be quite short-term one-off pieces of work. I think the piece of information I would say most surprises our clients and our users is that we ask how much of their staff's time is spent working with data. And at the moment, it's somewhere between 40 and 50% in every organisation that we have taught. People are astonished when we reveal this back to them. But it does reveal there's a huge amount of inefficiency going on. Lots of people are doing very, very long-winded, tedious things with their data. And I think there's a real opportunity to automate some of those things, even some very simple things that can happen in people's spreadsheets can make life a lot easier for them, I'm sure, at a very sort of basic level. In terms of AI, we don't do very much in that field. It tends to be very large scale data, and it tends to be in the kind of field of data that, you know, is about a visual or an audio or it's sort of a I suppose what I tend to find is that most of the non-profit, they have lots and lots of data that's actually small data, complex data, all very different data, and they tend not to have the kind of scale and volume of big data that you might get in other fields. But I suppose the areas where it's most likely to be of use, often in the grant making field, is a big area. The health area, there's a lot of big charities doing health research, and those kinds of areas, I think there is a really big place for AI. And I'm quite excited to see some projects emerging there. But for the 160,000 charities, most of which are very, very small and don't have even one data person, the likelihood of AI being the next big thing is pretty slim, I think.
I think we're about to run out of time. I was amazed. I had the time to say that actually. I think it is actually 3 o'clock now. So thank you everyone for attending. Hope you made a note of the dates for the next meeting, which is the 13th of July, which is a Wednesday. And thank you all for attending again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just add thank you very much to Sian, which
Oh, yes.
I thought was fascinating, and I might want to follow some things up with you outside, but also others might, and hopefully when we will be able to send round to the participants all of the links that you send. So if you could share the slides with Malcolm or me or both. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Bye.